For nearly 3 long years, America just watched as Europe tore itself apart in the Great War. But then, in 1917, everything changed. Today, we're getting into the incredible story of how the United States went from a determined neutral observer to a powerhouse that would decide the fate of World War I.
Okay, so let's look at how this all went down. When the war kicked off in 1914, the U.S. was adamant, we're staying out of this. But just 3 years later, the country was all in, officially at war. So what on earth happened in that short time to cause such a massive, history-altering shift? Here's how we're going to break it all down. We're going to connect the dots from that fierce isolationism to mobilizing the entire country and seeing how it set the stage for America's new role as a global power.
So back in August of 1914, President Woodrow Wilson announced a policy of strict neutrality. And this wasn't just some political move. No, this was exactly what the American people wanted.
You see, the reasons for staying out were really woven into the fabric of the country. I mean, you had this long-standing tradition of just avoiding Europe's endless quarrels. Plus, America was a nation of immigrants. You had millions of people with deep personal ties to both sides of the fight. German Americans and Irish Americans who, let's just say, were not big fans of Great Britain, were strongly against the war. And on top of all that, you had a really powerful pacifist movement pushing to stay out.
But as the war raged on, staying out got harder and harder. The realities of this new, modern kind of war were about to come crashing across the Atlantic, whether America was ready for it or not.
And the first big shock to the system came in May of 1915. A German U-boat torpedoed the British passenger liner, the Lusitania. 128 Americans were killed. This caused absolute outrage back in the States, and it was without a doubt a major turning point in how Americans felt about Germany.
And here's the thing, money talks. It turned out that true neutrality was pretty much impossible. American banks were loaning billions to the Allies. U.S. factories became their main weapons supplier. Meanwhile, a British naval blockade was choking off all trade with Germany. So even though America was officially neutral, its entire economy was basically on the side of the Allies. And Germany knew it. They even sponsored sabotage on U.S. soil like the massive Black Tom explosion in 1916.
All right, so fast forward to early 1917, and things are really heating up. America had reached a tipping point. The country wasn't just watching anymore. It was tangled up in this fierce debate about its future and its place in the world.
In February of 1917, Germany made a huge gamble. They announced they would resume unrestricted submarine warfare. That meant they were going to sink any ship in the war zone, including American ones. Now, that was a massive provocation. But wait, there's more. One final bombshell was about to drop that would completely shatter what was left of American neutrality.
And that bombshell wasn't another attack at sea. It was a secret message. British intelligence intercepted it, and they handed it right over to the Americans. It was called the Zimmermann Telegram, and what it proposed was so wild it was almost hard to believe.
Germany promised to help Mexico invade the U.S. and take back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. I mean, can you believe that? All of a sudden, this wasn't some distant European war anymore. This was a direct threat to American soil. It's just incredible how a single secret message helped change history. By the way, if you're finding this explainer valuable, please do me a quick favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps us out.
So, this wasn't an easy decision at all. A huge national debate erupted. On one side, you had President Wilson, who was now framing this as a moral crusade, a war to make the world safe for democracy. But on the other side, you had powerful voices like Senator Robert La Follette, who argued that America was being a hypocrite, basically saying we accepted the British blockade but condemned Germany's U-boats. He worried the country was being whipped into a frenzy of war by half-truths. And it all came to a head on April 2, 1917. President Wilson stood before Congress and gave this incredibly powerful speech. He pitched the war not as a fight for land or for power, but as this noble battle for the future of freedom itself, a fight for the rights of all humankind. And, well, here's how that debate ended. 4 days later, Congress voted. You can see there was definitely some opposition, especially from states in the Midwest and West where that isolationist feeling was strongest. But the vote was absolutely overwhelming. America was officially at war.
Now, declaring war is one thing. Actually fighting it, that's a whole different ballgame. The U.S. had to build a modern army and a war economy practically from scratch. We're talking about mobilizing the country on a scale no one had ever seen before.
I mean, you have to understand, the U.S. Army in 1917 was tiny. So to build it up fast, the nation turned to the draft. The Selective Service Act was passed, and a staggering 24 million men registered. Out of that, almost 3 million were ultimately called into service.
To manage all this, the federal government just exploded in size and power. Over 5,000 new government agencies popped up to handle everything from factory output to what people ate. You had the Committee on Public Information plastering the country with pro-war propaganda and these huge Liberty bond drives that raised billions of dollars to pay for it all.
And, this war wasn't just being fought in the trenches over in Europe. It was changing everything about American society right here at home. It created incredible new opportunities for some people, while tragically taking away the rights of others.
The demands of the war just sped up these massive social shifts. With so many men gone to fight, millions of women flooded into the workforce for the first time. The need for factory workers also fueled the Great Migration, as hundreds of thousands of African Americans moved north. But there was also a really ugly side to this. A wave of anti-German hysteria swept the nation, and the government pushed things like Meatless Tuesdays to save food for the troops.
And that wartime fervor had a very dark side. To silence anyone who opposed the war, the government passed laws like the Sedition Act of 1918. This law basically made it a crime to say anything disloyal about the government or the military. It was a serious attack on basic civil liberties.
This quote from the activist Max Eastman just perfectly captures the chilling effect these laws had. You literally couldn't gather your thoughts without worrying about being arrested. Thousands of people were prosecuted just for speaking out against the war. It was a scary time for free speech. But when American troops, the Doughboys, finally arrived in Europe, they were a game changer. They helped turn the tide of the entire war, and in doing so, they cemented a new permanent role for the United States on the world stage.
These fresh American troops started arriving at a rate of 10,000 a day in the summer of 1918. It was a huge boost to Allied morale and helped stop Germany's final desperate offensive. But that victory came at a terrible price. Over 116,000 American lives were lost.
So that's the big question, isn't it? The war marked the absolute end of American isolationism. The reluctant giant had woken up, and by stepping onto the world stage, it began its 100-year journey to becoming a global superpower. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. If you want to find out what happened next, you should definitely check out our video on the Roaring '20s right here in our Big Events in U.S. History playlist.